Democracy That Delivers is brought to you by the Center for International Private Enterprise. Now to your host.
This is the Democracy That Delivers podcast, brought to you by the Center for International Private Enterprise. My name is John Morrell, the Asia Pacific Director at CIPE. And over the coming weeks, I'll be bringing you a special podcast series, Business and Politics in Today's Pacific Islands. The first of which is today with Mr. Sam Saili. And we'll be talking about business and politics in Samoa, the independent state of Samoa. Sam is president of the Samoan Chamber of Commerce, and he's the founder and CEO of SkyEye Pacific, an exciting technology startup providing innovative solutions for the Pacific. Sam's full bio is available on the link. Now, Samoa has a big election coming up, scheduled for late August, and we're going to talk about that. But before we talk politics, I want to talk business. Sam, you're a businessman, an entrepreneur. You run the country's leading business group. So let me first ask you about the Samoan economy. The statistics look pretty good, over 5% GDP growth, limited inflation. But tell us, Sam, what's the big economic news out of Samoa that the world should know about?
Hi, John. Thank you for having me on the podcast. It's great to talk to everyone. In terms of our economy, yes, the statistics are looking positive. But in terms of current inflation, we are looking at increase in inflation, while the global inflation is getting lower. So there are a bit of concerns in terms of the statistics, but we're also generally doing business in Samoa and in the Pacific Islands is quite difficult due to our isolation and very small market size. So scaling is very difficult in doing business in generally for Samoa. In terms of there's always that scale that the World Bank does in terms of ease of doing business in any economy. And Samoa, unfortunately, is at the lower stage or state in terms of the ranking. So those are some of the things that we could do better in.
What are the fact that Samoa is ranked pretty low? You mentioned the ease of doing business. There are a lot of those indicators where countries are ranked for corruption or where are places that are good to do business. If Samoa is ranked pretty low of countries in terms of ease of doing business, what drives that? You mentioned a couple that are obvious. Geography. Samoa is small. It's an island. You have to travel quite a distance to get there. But what other factors make Samoa a cumbersome place to do business?
So the other factors is certainly the bureaucracy. There are silos in terms of registration. So different entities, government entities are involved in a process that should be very simple. So that's definitely an area. In terms of foreign investment, the data for Samoa is also quite bad in terms of what foreign investment that we've been able to bring in. So that also has a long way to go. And again, it is unfortunately the data or the evidence, it leans mostly on bureaucracy, the red tape on trying to register or achieve certain things. So that's a big area that we can improve on. But it is definitely a lot of improvements being put in place, but it is quite slow.
It's oftentimes, but Samoa is by no means the only country where this is the case, where a very active government, very active bureaucracy encumbers people trying to earn a living. They oftentimes get in the way. What is the economic record of the Fiame government, of the FAST government? How does the economic record of the current government, which is up for re-election in August, the Fiame government, How does its economic record compare to previous HRPP governments? Or have things become more cumbersome? Are things getting better? How would you describe the economic track record of the government for the last 5 years?
There has been some shift in priorities between the different governments. And the track record, as your question is quite difficult to gauge because HRPP had over 40 years of track record, and the
Which is
FIME,
something just to underline that, Sam. I don't think a
yes,
lot of people who observe Samoa, who work in the Pacific, don't know that Samoa in 2021 that broke almost a half century of
yes.
unbroken rule of a single party.
Yes, yes, and that's why it's difficult to have a good gauge in terms of judging how well the economy has. And also, there was the pandemic, and just after the pandemic, the new government came in. So it's quite difficult to have uh, a good judgment in terms of the track record. But overall, it has been good, as the statistics shows. The economy has been improving over the last few years. So yeah, overall, it's been good. There has been shift in priorities in terms of where the government invests money in, and that's where the most contrast is. The current caretaker government or the fast government were mostly focused on the rural areas, on investing in the rural areas, and not so much in infrastructure. So that's where the difference in terms of the priorities were between the two governments.
Interesting. Before we delve too deeply into the politics, and I am going to ask you about the work of the chamber and how the chamber tries to shape these issues and what the chamber's priority issues are. But before we get into kind of those specifics, I'm curious as to a cultural aspect of Samoa, the culture of entrepreneurship. In the United States, entrepreneurship, being an entrepreneur, that term, being an entrepreneurship, has a positive connotation. Entrepreneurs invent things, they design things, they get rich. There's a positive connotation behind the word entrepreneur. In a lot of countries, and we've documented this in several countries in the Pacific, in particular in Melanesia, being an entrepreneur doesn't really have a positive connotation. There's a view that you become an entrepreneur if you can't get a good job as a lawyer, a doctor, an entrepreneur. You become an entrepreneur if you, as a almost out of desperation. What is the culture like in Samoa? I mean, Sam, you, SkyEye Pacific, you're an entrepreneur. You've created a tech startup doing exciting things. Is that rare in Samoa? What is the entrepreneurial culture, the entrepreneurial ecosystem like in Samoa? Are you rare, or are there more Sams out there starting businesses in Samoa?
It's quite interesting that, yes, and it is true with what you mentioned in terms of in the Pacific, when you say entrepreneur, it is quite different in terms of culture between the Western culture and here in the Pacific. And usually the parents always kind of lean or groom the children to always go into safe employment, and that would be the normal doctor, lawyer, accountant. Those are the safe, and they always go for the safety first, and they always actually encourage to go into the government or the public sector because they see that as safe employment. So it is very difficult in terms of the ecosystem when you go into being an entrepreneur. But I think mostly it is not because of it's more of those that can identify opportunities and believe in those opportunities that they can make a difference out of those opportunities. And that's where our company came out of, is actually looking at those opportunities and believing that we can make a difference by taking on those opportunities. Because before we were in the private sector, my brother and I were in the public sector. And unfortunately, we saw things that could be done better. And our ideas and our thoughts and our suggestions and our recommendation wasn't really taken on by those that were making decisions. So we decided to go into our own, do our own thing. And SkyEye was born out of there. And it is quite rewarding, but it also is very difficult because there's not much of a safety net for entrepreneurs. If you fail, then there's no backup in the small markets that we operate in.
What are the biggest obstacles to, like you've done, start your own business, not with the idea of just subsistence, but you're trying to create something that can grow, that can endure. A lot of ingredients go into that beyond intelligence and hard work. You need to have contract enforcement. You need to, your property rights have to be protected. There have to be quality public services. There are ingredients that are necessary for entrepreneurship to be viable. In Samoa, in your experience, what were the biggest obstacles that you faced that you thought, you know what, if I were doing this in Australia or Japan or somewhere else, this would have been much easier. I wouldn't have to deal with all this hassle. What were the obstacles that you faced?
Absolutely. We always kind of dream of, if only we're in a different market. The issue is scale. When I mentioned previously, it's very difficult to scale our operations because of the market size that we have. The amount of people that can use the products that we create, especially when it's technology based, then you have to have population that are tech savvy and have access to internet and have access to smart devices so that they can utilize the products that we create. And also the infrastructure. Not sure if you know, but PayPal and doesn't work in the Pacific. So that's where that's the building block.
It doesn't work anywhere in the Pacific or just in Samoa?
Doesn't work anywhere in the Pacific. So like PayPal, that's one of the building blocks of technology for any platform that wants to get paid. So those types of infrastructure limitations is very difficult for an entrepreneur to work. And we had to create our own version of PayPal. And we also had to create our own version of Google Maps, which are like a given for any startup. Those infrastructures are there and ready to plug in. But in the Pacific, unfortunately, that's the reality. We don't have that access. So it is even, I think, maybe 10 times more difficult for an entrepreneur to have a startup in the Pacific because of the scale and the infrastructure. But we have the blessing of our family, my brother and sisters. We are all involved in the company, and we all have different areas of expertise, and we lean on each other to look at how we can create the ecosystem that we're able to sustain our growth. And thankfully, that worked, and we're now in Samoa, Vanuatu, Tonga, and Solomon Islands. Because when we create a product that fixes or solves a problem in Samoa, usually our Pacific neighbors have the same difficulties. So it's been easy to replicate our solution in the other islands.
Exciting, Sam. And the fact that it's 10 times harder to succeed at this in Samoa makes your success 10 times more impressive. That really is exciting, Sam. Let me ask you about the chamber. How does the chamber fit into this in terms of what your priority issue areas are, how you try to engage with the government to make the economic environment better? What are, because you've mentioned several obstacles and business dilemmas that Samoa has. Some are fixable, some less so. I don't think the chamber has found out a way to physically move Samoa to be closer to major markets. And so keeping in mind that some problems we recognize no chamber, no matter how well intentioned, can solve. What are
Yes.
the chamber's priority issue areas, and how does the chamber try to influence public opinion and move the needle on its issues?
Yes. So being part of the chamber and the current president was a conscious decision because we saw opportunities that we could improve ecosystem. That's one area that to be sustainable is every part of the ecosystem has to be robust. And we want to work with the government in creating ecosystems so that all the players can thrive or all the businesses can thrive. In terms of what I mentioned before in the bureaucracy that's hindering the ease of doing business, that's certainly a priority for the chamber and has been for a while in trying to streamline a lot of the processes that could be easily fixed. And that's a priority. And we're always knocking on the door of of the different ministries as well as the ministers to try and put these processes to streamline it, to make it easier for our businesses to operate. We always on top of policies and legislation. That's a major area of the chamber in trying to make sure that any policies or legislations that come in or will be introduced, that it is taken the lens of the private sector to make sure that it doesn't negatively affect the private sector. And one of our other major priority is we want to make the public, and especially the government, and the public understand that the private sector is an actual ecosystem of the whole society. The private sector is providing a lot of the employment, and we are part of the ecosystem. There's a perception in the public that the private sector are only there to make money and doesn't matter what else, just make the money. But it's not like that. That's something that we want to grow that understanding that we are part of the whole economy, of the whole society. If the private sector is healthy, we're able to contribute. And as they say, the engine of growth is within the private sector. So we want to promote more of that perception that we are part of the ecosystem.
That makes a lot of sense. With the election coming up, it's political season. Are there particular candidates or particular parties? I believe there are three main players in next month's election in Samoa. Are there particular candidates or parties that are viewed as being pro-business versus other parties maybe being more pro-labor? I guess maybe even a broader question than that is, does Samoan politics fall on the same left-right spectrum as in a lot of other countries? In the United States, you have Republicans and Democrats. In Australia, you have the Liberals, who are conservative, and Labor. But it's the same sort of left-right spectrum. What are politics like in Samoa? Do Samoan politics fall on that same spectrum? And if so, who are the players who are generally regarded in terms of their political brand as being pro-business?
All right. Yeah, so as I mentioned, the Samoa had basically a one-party nation for almost half a century. Yeah. So the terms of in terms of looking at the government or the party's policies wasn't really interesting in the past elections because everyone just thought they were just going to win again. So in trying to look at what they're saying and what the policies they're putting through hasn't been a consideration for quite a long time. So now with currently there is 7 political parties that's going to be contesting the new election, the upcoming election. So it is very interesting now. All the parties now are very much focused now on what their message is, what their policies are, and everyone now are actually looking at those policies. And so it's really, it was very good to have stability for almost half a century. And Samoa was the poster child of being a stable political in the region. But now that with this change, I think a lot more people are engaged in the election. A lot more people are now looking seriously at the policies and what that entails for them. So, but going back to your question in terms of do we have this like what you mentioned, the Republican and the Democrat? No, we don't have that kind of theme or lenses in our decision making or how we vote. But I believe that might be something but we kind of see that now that there is general competition and people or parties wanting to differentiate themselves. So we do see that now coming through, where they're now openly focused on certain areas and looking at which base that they're now trying to encourage. So to answer your question, no, we don't have that, but I see that now it's going to. I think it is going to be a factor going forward, that there are going to be what you call factions, where there will be clear demarcations in the parties and what their policies are. But in terms of the candidates, like as you mentioned, 3 main players, if you can put it that way. I think the previous prime minister has been very pro-business.
Prime Minister Fiame, the most recent prime minister, you mean?
No,
the one
the
before
previous
her.
prime minister. Yes, that's the HRPP and Tula Epa are quite clear pro-business, and that doesn't mean the current government is not. And it's just a matter of priorities. They have been more focused on the rural areas, and that's also very good, and has been. But yeah, so it's yeah, they kind of both. But the previous government had a lot more track record, if I can put it that way. So that's why I also mentioned it's difficult to judge clearly. But yeah, I think the previous government was more pro-business, but that doesn't mean the current government is not as well. It's just different priorities, and and their manifesto is quite pro-business as well in trying to improve the business, the private sector.
The stories about Samoan politics that you can find in the United States and elsewhere is the issue of foreign policy in Samoa, how that's impacting Samoan politics. The narrative is that the FAST government, Prime Minister Fiame, backed out or backed away from some BRI-funded programs. There was a large port that China was going to fund through loans that the HRPP government had pursued and agreed to. The FAST government, Prime Minister Fiame, backed away. Is that accurate? And second, does that reflect ideology where one side tends to be, the HRPP is a bit more pro-China, whereas the FAST government has been, and if SUP wins a future SUP government, they're not as pro-China, or is the West mixing things up and we're drawing lessons that shouldn't be drawn?
It is not that clear cut. The HRPP government did was, quite invested in a new port. And that was because economically, that was our biggest, one of the biggest barrier is our port. We couldn't get enough ships in and ships out. So that affected the economy quite a lot. But in terms of investing in the port and who was going to build the port, that wasn't clear cut. They just had the plan to build a new port. Now, there was, in terms of having the Chinese government sponsor or grant to build the port, that wasn't, it wasn't clear cut. They were looking at options, and definitely China was the one that came forth most prominently. So whether that is the narrative that it was going to be China, I don't think that's a clear cut decision or the narrative there. But in the fast government stepping back from the port, I think that was more also due to environmental and effect on the ecosystem, because it is a particular area that has one of the biggest mangroves in the Polynesia region. So that was also quite heavily put forward by the fast government against the port, was the area that they earmarked was a major ecological benefit for the community. So it's not really just because of who's funding the port.
I mean, the data does show that China-funded, BRI-funded programs have a less than stellar environmental record. Oftentimes, environmental reviews, environmental impact assessments, which are required by local law, they're sort of conveniently skipped with BRI projects. By no means universally, but that is part of their reputation. One last question I have for you, Sam, to kind of wrap up the conversation about the Samoan, the upcoming election. What role does foreign policy play, or what role is foreign policy playing in the campaign? We see elsewhere in the Pacific, the Solomon Islands, foreign policy decisions, in particular vis-a-vis China and Taiwan. Foreign policy decisions have featured prominently in political campaigns. What role does foreign policy play in the current campaign in Samoa?
That's a very good question. And to be honest, it hasn't really played a major part in our elections and in politics, because Samoa was stable, politically stable for quite a long time. And the government always was able to in a certain way, dictate what's best for Samoa first. So there was not that much influence or factor in the decisions of the Samoans and the citizens on who to vote for based on foreign policy. And I think this election also is around that. It's not so much, it's not really recognized so much by those that will be voting on what the foreign policy of which of the political parties will be putting into place. But yes, that's not to say that it's not important. It's definitely going to be more and more relevant because of the location that the Pacific is in and the different influences that our neighbors and so it is going to be a lot more contested and a lot more focused on it going forward. But I think for this particular election, because it's also brought in quite a year forward, it was supposed to be in 2026, but due to the dissolving of the parliament, they had to bring it forward. So with that timeline, I think everything was the lead up to the election is there wasn't that time for people to put forward their manifesto, do the campaign, and get people to understand. Right now, it's very compressed timeline, and so we can't really flesh out how things, what really is going to make, or how what would really influence the decisions of the Samoans. It's very a guessing game at the moment.
Given all that you said, Sam, what's going to happen next month? If you could, I'm sure you have a crystal ball in your back pocket, but even if you've forgot it out in your car, what is your best forecast? What's going to happen, and how should the world interpret the results?
So yeah, now that it's really good for the citizens to actually have that many choices, and now that now they can look more on what benefits them as well as the policies. But as I just mentioned, it's very difficult to know what's going to what would be the most influential factor for people to decide. But I think it will definitely be a coalition. I think it will be a coalition, and that will also mean a lot of negotiations. How that will come about, and what would be the main points that will be negotiated on. Yeah, I'm not too sure at the moment, but my view is it's probably going to be a coalition, and I think that might be the first for Samoa for a century. So that also is going to be interesting.
Paint a picture, Sam, of progress. You don't paint a picture of utopia, but it's a story of progress. The fact that Samoa right now is in the midst of a contested political campaign in which voters have choices, candidates and parties are at least trying to differentiate themselves based on ideas. This is a good thing, regardless of who wins. Sometimes the process matters, and the process that you're describing, Sam, it sounds like one of progress. And Sam, I thank you so much. We all thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. And to everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us on Democracy That Delivers. To learn more about CIPE's work, either in the Pacific or anywhere in the world, visit CIPE.org. That's CIPE.org. And Sam, Mr. Sam Saili, President of the Samoan Chamber of Commerce, founder and CEO of SkyEye Pacific, telling us about business and politics in Samoa. Sam, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to talking again soon.
Thank you very much, John. And yes, it's definitely an exciting time. It is a learning experience. It is, as you mentioned, a process. And it's good that our citizens are going through this, and we can only grow and be stronger from this process.
All hope, anyway. Thanks so much, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Democracy That Delivers is brought to you by the Center for International Private Enterprise.